This is Dr. Ellert with part number 3 that we're going to make. This time we're going to make the middle face of our Rubik's Cube. For you to see what that looks like before we actually get into the modeling, this is what it's going to look like. So we have two faces that are square because this is going to go on the middle face. So it's going to have one side on, or one of these faces is going to be on one side of the cube and the other face is going to be on the other side of the cube. Additionally, we have this rounded wedge piece here. This is going to take a little bit of some trickery. Don't worry, I'll walk you straight through it so that you can understand what's going on here. But this is really going to be where we end up using a lot of those skills or a lot of those approaches that I was talking about in terms of creating separate bodies, finding the intersection of those multiple bodies, and using that combined function in very intentional ways. I have already created an extrusion for my 9 by 9 by 9 millimeter cube. I created a 9 by 9 millimeter square and extruded it out with a mid-plane extrusion. So at this point, please pause the video and create the cube yourself. Okay, so now that we have our 9 by 9 by 9 millimeter cube, we can get started with some of the more complicated things. I'm going to create a sketch, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this rounded space. So I have a cube, and I've kind of cut off this corner with a spherical cut. So to do that, I'm going to create a sketch and create a sketch on the top plane. So I have my top plane here, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit and pan down because I'm going to want to make my circle off on the corner, like so. Additionally, what I'm going to do is instead of making a sphere by cutting and putting a line down the middle, I'm going to set a line at a diagonal across the circle and trim half of the side. Again, we can ignore the warning, don't need to worry about that. And so we have this semicircle at a particular angle. In previous videos, or at least the previous video that we had, you see that this can be moved across in any particular direction. I can change that angle, I can change that height, I can change the radius, etc., etc. So let's add some dimensions in order to make this work the way that we want it to work. First of all, we want a half circle, so I'm going to highlight the bar and the center of my circle, set them to be coincident, like I have done before. And now I'm going to set up some of the critical dimensions in here. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set the distance that this circle is, the center of the circle is relative to the outer edges of my cube. That's going to be 13.5 millimeters on both sides. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set the radius of my circle, which is going to be 11.25. You'll start seeing some repeats of these dimensions over and over again. Press enter there, and so now I've clipped this corner. The last thing that I need to do is somehow, because this can rotate any particular direction, I have to set that rotation. I don't want it to be vertical. I don't want it to be horizontal. I want it to be at a 45-degree angle. And so when I set my dimensions, the way that I'm going to do that is by clicking this vertical bar and this horizontal line. Then I have my dimension set, vertical side, and my horizontal line, or my angled line, and I'm going to set the angle in between those two pieces. So this 45 degrees helps me get the right amount of corner and allows me to do a spherical cut the way that I want to do that cut. So now that we have our fully defined sketch, I'm going to finish my sketch and then revolve my object, revolve my profile. So I'm going to select my profile if it didn't already auto-select, and then select the axis that I want to be revolving my system around. And I do want a 360-degree cut. I could, if I wanted to, limit those 360 degrees to something that's less than 360 degrees, but there's no use to it. So I'm going to set a 360-degree cut around that surface and get that curved edge. This is going to allow this the middle part to be able to slide around and rotate around that sphere that we've already created in our system. So now that we have that, life is looking good. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to reuse this sketch. So we don't have to repeat the sketch. We can just reuse it and then do another action with it. So the second action that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to return back a wedge of that object or of that profile. And so I'm going to be able to get this kind of wedge shape here. And the way I'm going to do that is by clicking on that sketch or coming here and clicking on this sketch in the navigation space, and then re-click on this revolve. When I click on the revolve, maybe the sketch will come around. I need to select my profile, so I'm going to make my sketch visible here, and then click on that profile, and then select the axis that I want to do my revolution on. But instead of setting my axis to do a revolution of a ball that I just cut out, I'm going to set it to be a symmetric revolution, and I'm going to set it for a 15 degrees up and 15 degrees below that profile. Okay, so it's going to be a total of 30 degrees, 15 degrees up, 15 degrees below. The next thing that I'm going to do is, instead of using the join or using the cut, this is when I'm going to use my new body. I'm going to create it as a new body so that when I then need to merge multiple profiles together and use the intersections, Autodesk Fusion will, Fusion 360 will be able to separate out and treat these as individual entities. So I want to keep this as a new body because this is going to help me actually get the things that I want to happen. I'm going to press OK, and now I have a wedge attached to my shape. And if I hide my sketch, see here, I have two separate bodies, which I can treat as two separate entities in space. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hide this body, because this body is going to be, this wedge is going to be in the way of the next profile that I need to create, because I need to create now this half or quarter circle that you see here. And so in order to do that and to be able to do that without much issue, I'm going to hide this body. If you don't want to hide the body, but you do want to change how opaque that body is, if you right click on it and then go to opacity control, you can also make it very transparent and set the transparency to something the opacity to something very small and make it very transparent. So you can see that it still exists, but it's not going to get in the way of modeling. So again, I'm going to create a new sketch, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this profile without the fillets. We're going to make this profile. We'll add the fillets later, but we're going to make that profile. So I create a sketch. Again, I'm going to want the top plane. So you see here, I've selected the top plane. Y is the green axis, X is the red axis. I click on that. It's exactly what I want to be able to see. I'm going to create two concentric circles. And again, they're just going to be, off a little bit in space because we're going to add some dimensions in order to get it to sit where we want it to sit. And ideally, I'd like to be able to create these dimensions and develop relationships with it. But for now, I just need to worry about them being off in space. Now, I don't need all of these two concentric circles. I really only want a quarter of my space. And so I'm going to add some lines up top and another line below to intersect, and then click the trim and get rid of this other space. So if I trim there and I trim there, I get this a quarter circle band that I want. Right click, press cancel, and now we need to add dimensions to our space. The first thing that I'm going to do is set where the center of my circle is located. That will be 13.5 and 13.5. I will then set the radii of my two circles. So the inner radius is going to be 8.25, and the outer radius will be that 11.25. And now what I need to do, if we look at our sketch, the thing that is changing with our sketch is that this vertical line can sweep along the process, and this horizontal line can sweep along this process. So we need to set the distances or set the information for these two lines. And the way that I'm going to set those distances is I'm going to define the distance between this inside edge and that line. And that distance is going to be 1.5. And the same thing down below. So now I have a fully defined sketch. Again, if you need a minute, you can pause this video to add these dimensions to your space. Outer radius of 11.25, inner radius of 8.25, horizontal and vertical dimensions from the further edge to be 13.5, and horizontal and vertical dimensions from the inner edge to be 1.5. I will finish my sketch, and now I have this profile, and I'm going to extrude my body. Now I'm going to do a vertical extrusion because I can get this shape from that wedge that I've already made. And so if I over extrude and I extrude farther out, up and down, if I over extrude and then intersect those two things, I will get this body the way that I want it to. So if I go to extrude and click the profile, I'm going to set this as, again, a symmetric extrusion. I'm going to set it as a whole length extrusion. I tend to prefer those a little bit better. And I'm going to extrude 6 millimeters across the board. So we fully encapsulate, you see how here's my wedge. We fully encapsulate extrusion, the whole height of my wedge. And that's really the thing that matters more than anything, is that as I extrude this body, when I do that intersection step, I'll be able to make it work. I don't want it to be a cut. I don't want it to be a join. I'm actually going to, again, extrude as a new body. This will, again, allow me to merge the bodies the way that I want them to be merged, instead of adding material where I don't want to add material at the moment. So I'm going to create a whole separate entity, a brand new body, and press OK. So now I have 3 bodies. Let's go. We've got the first body, which is our cube. We have the second body, which is this wedge. I'll add a little bit of opacity to that, a little bit better. So there's our wedge, which is our second body. And our third body is this extruded space. And I'll actually reduce down that opacity a little bit so you can see the overlap between our two bodies. And so ultimately, I want to take the intersection between the wedge and this body, this extrusion, in order to make it work. Okay, so I'm going to take the intersection between these two bodies, and that will give me most of what I need. So to do that, I'm going to go to this combine option that we've talked about a couple of different videos, and I'm going to select my target body. My target body I'm going to use as my extrusion, my vertical extrusion. That's the thing that I'm essentially modifying. And I'm modifying it by this particular tool, this wedge cut. Now, when the default operation that I have is set to join, so this is essentially welding one to another, and then you get this weird wonky shape. That's not what I want. I don't want the cut. The cut's basically going to cut that wedge out of the weird wonky shape, so I get a different shape. I want the intersection. I want to be able to have that intersection. Let's make it look like that. I want to have that wedge. I've taken that extrusion, and I've cut that wedge profile, and I'm only keeping the extrusion through that wedge profile. I'm going to press OK. This is going to merge body 2 and body 3. And it's going to leave me just that wedge. Right? The next thing that I'm going to do is, now that I've modified the shape in the way that I want it, I have the specific profile that I wanted extruded, but with kind of that wedge shape associated with it, I'm going to change that opacity back to 100% opaque. And now I can actually merge my two bodies together. So I'm going to go back to the combine. I'm going to use this cube, or this modified cube, as my target body. Select the wedge as this modified wedge space as my tool body. And now, instead of the intersection or a cut, I actually want to agglomerate these together. I want to create one whole body and only one body, because then I can manipulate and change things at the same time. So now I have one single body, right? One single part, one single entity. And now we're just going to add the additional finishing details. Those finishing details are, first, a 0.3 millimeter fillet along all sides. To do that, I can just click and drag and highlight the whole body, because now I want all of my edges to have a fillet, instead of some edges having a fillet, some edges having a chamfer, etc. And so I'm going to go and actually click and drag to highlight the whole body, and then come over here, click fillet, and press 0.3, set to 0.3. I could also change that radius this way. Okay, it's going to cause, it'll come up with an error if I make my fillet too small. But I could make adjustments, fine adjustments on what I think is reasonable with that click and drag option. But I can also type in that information here. And then I will press OK. And I have a nice clean fillet on all my sides, like you see here. The last thing that I need to do is, now, because I have two edges that are going to be outward facing, I need to make that square on, or extrude that surface on both edges. So to do that, as a reminder, I'm going to click on a corner. So one thing that I noticed when I created this sketch is, you see that on these sides I have a much more rounded corner than I've had in the past. Much more rounded edge than I've had in the past. Well, this was because of that clicking and dragging modification that I had shown you. I didn't realize that it had made a particular edit to my system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some adjustments onto my fillet, and I wanted to model how we actually do this. So if I go back to that fillet, I can come down here. This is our history. So these are all the different steps that we've created, all the different instructions that we've made. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on Edit Feature. When I look at this, one of the things that I noticed specifically is that in previous analyses, this tangency weight option, okay, that will change essentially how big this radius is, right? This tangency weight has typically been 1. So I'm going to come back to that 1, and it's going to give me a much sharper corner, as you see here and here on these edges. And that's exactly what I want to have. I do want a constant radius. I have particular faces on it, all that other stuff. And so that tangency weight was really the thing that was causing the issues. You see how if I adjust it to 2, I have a much more rounded space. If I adjust to 3, it's telling me that that's not appropriate for my settings. So I'm going to go back to 1 and then press OK. Now this surface looks a lot similar to what I have, but I am also missing a fillet on this edge. So I'll go back, edit my feature, and then come up here and hopefully select my face as well. Just so that it's all added. Okay. I could remove and then just redo if I wanted to, but I'm not going to remove and redo. Double check to make sure that all of my surfaces have been selected. Looks like everything. This edge is also sharp, so I'm actually going to delete out of that and select both of my sharp edges. To set that 0.3 millimeters and make sure that everything's exactly the way I want it. I could also delete it and then redo something and redo it and select all the edges if I really wanted to, but this is also another way to do it. Press OK, double check. All of my edges are rolled in the ways that I want. And now I can move forward. I've already created this sketch. And so to edit my sketch, I'm going to right click and click on Edit Sketch. And now I have those nice vertices diagonal from each other where I can make a fully defined square, finish my sketch, extrude 0.225, and then again, I don't want a flat edge to this. I want a taper at -45 degrees. I want this to be a join, just like so, and I'm going to press OK. Now what I'd like you to do is pause the video and modify and add that beveled edge on this square on your own. Okay, so now we should have our 2 bevel edges on the 2 fully defined squares that we currently have in our part, square sides that we have in our part. And this is what your whole part should look like. So we've got this rounded edge, like we have here. We got this rounded edge. So as I move between these 2 parts, there's really not anything different because they are the exact same part, one I just made now versus one I made yesterday. So with that, we're done with our 3rd part. Let's save our Rubik's Cube. So I'm saving it, and pressing OK, making sure that it's fully updated. And we will be able to move on to our last part, which is going to be the corner.